Chapter 118. They had thought of telling the emperor that the emperor would come to the empress's Xianghe palace every night, but even the empress wanted to help Tang Kai hide it. Every time a eunuch brought it up, the empress would find a topic to avoid it. The emperor had always doted on the empress the most. No matter what the empress said, he never questioned it. Slowly, they understood that their efforts were futile and that they could only be trampled on. Huai didn't know why he was so talkative today. In front of the imperial concubine, he actually said all the words that he had suppressed in his heart for so long without changing a word. It was as if the knot in his heart had been opened up and he had someone to talk to. Later, when I hurt my face, eunuch Tang lost his patience with me. When the imperial concubine entered the palace, he saw that I was an eyesore, so he arranged for me to come to Fengqi Palace. Shen Yueji couldn't help but chuckle when she heard this. This eunuch Tang is so arrogant. He casually tossed a servant that he didn't want from Auspicious Harmony Palace to my Phoenix Perch Palace. So it turns out that in his eyes, I'm so insignificant. Double Happiness's face was filled with righteous indignation. This Tang Kai is so daring. He actually dared to do such a thing in the palace. Your Highness, should we tell this to the emperor? Shen Yueji raised her hand. Seeing this, Double Happiness immediately shut up. Huai eyes had been shining, but when he saw Shen Yueji's gesture, his eyes dimmed. That's right. The person who was favored by the 6 palaces was the Empress. Even the Empress intentionally concealed the truth for Tang Kai. In the inner palace, who dared to seek their own death and find trouble with Tang Kai? Everyone was probably clenching their teeth, afraid that this matter would be related to them and they would lose their lives. You sound so moved, but how can this Empress believe your one-sided words? Huai knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily. What I said is true. If there is any falsehood in my words, may I be struck by lightning. Shen Yueji smiled faintly and looked at him. Moreover, I can't interfere with the matters of your Xianghe palace. I can't offend the Empress for a little eunuch like you. What do you think? Huai face was as white as paper. Despite the disappointment in his heart, he still nodded. Guifei is right. However, I am not such a cold-hearted person. Huai gloomy eyes gradually lit up with hope. Originally, I had asked Double Happiness to call you over because I had something else to tell you to do, but I didn't expect you to have such an unbearable experience. Huai, this consort doesn't know much about you. As for your words or your loyalty, this consort can't be certain. If Imperial Consort can help this servant redress the injustice today and take revenge for those who died, this servant is willing to serve Imperial Consort faithfully and will not dare to have any other thoughts. Helping you is just to let you meet His Majesty and tell him the whole story. When the time comes, His Majesty will personally make the decision. However, the Emperor had always been protective of the Empress. Last time, Ben Gong and the Empress had even had a bad misunderstanding. In the end, the Emperor had sided with the Empress and felt that the Empress was the victim. If Ben Gong helped you, it would be clearly making trouble for the Empress in front of His Majesty. At that time, not only would the Empress hate Ben Gong, even His Majesty would not like to see Ben Gong. This servant will listen to Imperial Consort. Whatever Imperial Consort wants this servant to do, this servant will do. Chapter 119. Walking up to him, Shen Yueji whispered a few words in his ear. Huai expression changed again, and finally calmed down. Yes. Your Highness, can this servant from Auspicious Harmony Palace be trusted? He's Gu Yuan's man. What if he's a spy Gu Yuan arranged in our Phoenix Perch Palace? I didn't say much to him, I just said that there's someone familiar in Jiaoyang Palace and told him to inform Gu Yuan. Even if Gu Yuan knows that I ordered Huai to inform her, she can't say anything. Even so, double happiness still looked hesitant. That's too risky. I'm afraid that Huai Yang really is the Empress man, and when he finds out that your highness is behind this, he'll turn around and harm you. Do you think he's done anything that's not beneficial to me? Xin Yueji pursed her lips and smiled. Besides, what's there to be afraid of? Don't we still have the regent? Hearing this, Shuangxi's worry turned into joy. Yes, your ladyship is currently protected by the regent, and with our Shen family, even if the empress wanted to harm your ladyship, she would have to weigh her own weight. Just one Shen family is not something that she could easily touch, not to mention that behind your ladyship, there is still the regent supporting her. Auspicious Harmony Palace, what did you say? With this shout, the tea set on the table was smashed down by a pair of delicate hands. In a split second, the sound of crackling echoed throughout the hall. Your Highness, calm down, Your Highness, calm down. The servants of Auspicious Harmony Palace knelt on the ground. All of them were trembling with fear. Yes, this servant saw it with my own eyes. When this servant passed by Diaoyang Palace, I saw Miss Yuxiu. Miss Yuxiu, Yuxiu had disappeared last night and had yet to return. Gu Yueyin was suspicious and ordered people to look for her in secret, but there was no news. The first person she suspected was Xin Yueji. When she ordered her spies to investigate Diaoyang Palace, she received news that the emperor was staying at Diaoyang Palace. She secretly clenched her fists. Since the emperor was with her, Xin Yueji didn't need to do anything to get rid of Yuxiu. However, she was shocked in her heart when she heard the 3 words Mink's Sun Palace, and she had a bad premonition. She suppressed the uneasiness in her heart. Her pair of gentle eyes were now ferocious and sinister. Coupled with her ugly face under the veil, it was even more terrifying. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and head to Diaoyang Palace. Bring Yuxiu back. Yes. Yes. After she finished speaking, she shot a cold glare at Huai Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. If you dare to lie, this empress will definitely remove your head. This servant's words are absolutely true. This servant saw it with his own eyes. I definitely wouldn't dare to lie. In less than an hour, Yuxiu's body was carried back by 2 eunuchs wrapped in white silk. Gu Yueyin sat on the phoenix throne. After they left, she couldn't calm down. Yuxiu suddenly disappeared, and even Mammy Li's whereabouts were unknown. She had sent her out last night to get rid of Xiaozhuozi, but she had yet to return. Now that the white silk was pulled apart, Yuxiu's face was purple and bloodless. Her entire body was like a piece of white paper, and no flesh could be seen. She stared in shock and fear. Her mouth was wide open, and there was no tongue in it. There were 2 sharp marks on her purple neck, as if she had been strangled to death with sharp nails. Chapter 120. The next moment, Your Highness, bad news. Your Highness, Mammy Li. A sharp voice mixed with terror came from outside the hall. Gu Yueyin looked over and saw a panic-stricken young eunuch tumbling and crawling on the ground, his face as white as a sheet of paper from fright. Your Highness. Your Highness, Mammy Li. Mammy Li, Gu Yueyin clenched her teeth and tried to calm her trembling heart. She pretended to be calm and said, What happened to Mammy Li? Mammy Li. Mammy Li is dead, what? Gu Yueyin widened her eyes and her face was full of disbelief. 2 eunuchs carried Mammy Li's body in from outside. There were 2 sharp strangulation marks on Yuxiu's neck, and there was a deep wound on Mammy Li's neck. Blood diffused from the wound and solidified on her neck. Her torso inside seemed to be completely hollowed out, and it was all supported by her bones and unknown things. But what scared Gu Yueyin the most was her face, which was studded with nails. There were 9 thick nails. Every part of her face, every corner, looked exactly like Gu Yuaqin at that time. Her scalp was numb. She staggered to sit on the phoenix chair and almost fell down. Fortunately, the maid beside her held her in time. She looked at the maid with trembling and tearful eyes. Her vision blurred, and all of a sudden, a face that she couldn't be more familiar with appeared in front of her eyes. It was a terrifying face that was full of rough nails. "Ah!" she screamed and pushed the maidservant away. "Get lost! Get out of here! Get out of here! Your Highness, what's wrong with you?" The maid who was pushed away looked scared and puzzled. "She's back, she must be back," Gu Yuaqin murmured in a daze. Her almond-shaped eyes were full of tears. "I want to see the Emperor. I want to see the Emperor. Your Highness, the Emperor is discussing with the ministers in the Imperial kitchen. I don't care. I don't care. I want to see the Emperor. Go quickly. Go to the Imperial study room, go now." After Gu Yuaqin finished speaking emotionally, she felt her vision darken and her powerless body fell straight to the ground. "Your Highness, what's wrong with you? Your Highness, wake up." For a moment, the servants of Auspicious Harmony Palace were in chaos. Many panicked shouts could be heard. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and inform His Majesty in the Imperial study. Quickly summon the Imperial physician. Summon the Imperial physician. If anything happens to Her Majesty, be careful of your heads." Huai Yang looked at the scene in front of him coldly. The servants of Xianghe Palace were in a flurry. Without the support of Yu Xiao and Mamili, they didn't know what to do. While no one was paying attention, he quietly retreated. After returning to Phoenix Perch Palace, he told Shin Yueji everything he had seen in Auspicious Harmony Palace, including how Gu Yuaqin had fainted from fright. Double Happiness listened with great interest. In the end, she didn't forget to pour a cup of tea for Shin Yueji. She even poured a cup of tea for Huai Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. Taking a sip of tea, Shin Yueji looked doubtful. "I didn't expect the death of Yu Xiao and Mamili to have such a big impact on Sister Empress." Chapter 121. Shin Yueji gently knocked on the table and glanced at him. Seeing this, Huai Yang immediately shut his mouth. "Since you are now my servant in Feng Qi Palace, you should remember what you should say and what you shouldn't say. The late Empress has been dead for several months, and the Emperor is a wise monarch. How can he believe these so-called ghosts and gods? If you continue spouting nonsense, even I won't be able to protect you if someone with ulterior motives hears you." "Yes. I will obey your Highness's words." "All right. Shuangxi." "Yes, your Highness." "Prepare a few things. Later, accompany me to Xianghe Palace to visit Her Majesty the Empress." "Yes, your Highness." Shuangxi responded respectfully and went to prepare. Shin Yueji glanced at Huai Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. "The rest is up to you. Consider it my reward for you. As for whether the Emperor will believe your words and punish you because of a moment of anger, it's all up to you." "Thank you, your Highness. I understand." When Shin Yueji arrived at Xianghe Palace, she found that the outside of Xianghe Palace was surrounded by colorful concubines. She had never had a good look at Feng Zhiqing's harem, whether it was when she was alive or now. She only knew that any beauty in the harem was a beauty that could topple a city or country. Every move of the beauty was breathtakingly beautiful. When the concubines saw her coming, there were disdain and flattery on their faces. No matter if they were disdain or flattery, when they saw her approaching, they all saluted. "Greetings, Sister Imperial Concubine." "Greetings, Sister Imperial Concubine." Shin Yueji stopped in front of them, and her bright eyes quickly swept over them. "All my sisters are here. We really have a deep sisterhood. As soon as I heard that Sister Imperial Concubine was sick, we all came to see her. But why are you all standing outside? Sister Imperial Concubine, you don't know. It's the Emperor who doesn't allow us to go in. Oh. I heard that Her Highness fainted because of the late Emperor. And before I came here, I also heard that Mammy Lee, the trusted maid of the Empress, had her face covered with 9 thick nails before she died. Rumor has it that when the late Empress died, her face had the same 9 nails. Shin Yueji glanced at the concubine who spoke. She wore a long green dress, and her face was slightly powdered. She was beautiful and refined, her small face exquisite, and her figure exquisite. His lips curled up slightly. Which younger sister are you? The former empress only said that she was drowned in the lake, but Ben Gong did not know when her face was covered with thick nails. You can't just say things like that. It's true. There are very few people who know this. I am one of them, but I was not sure until Mammy Lee died and the empress fainted in shock. Then I was sure. When the concubines heard this, they all sighed and fell silent. Shin Yueji's small face was cold, and no one could tell whether she was happy or angry. However, the concubine didn't know how to read people's expressions. She continued to say, I have long heard that the late empress was not favored when she was in the Gu family. She was bullied every day, and the Gu family raised her like a dog. And the empress never treated the late empress as her own sister. Now, the empress was so scared just because of Mammy Lee. It was clear that she had a guilty conscience. Maybe the late empress's death was, Shin Yueji scolded in a low voice. Chapter 122. Shin Yueji smiled coldly. Who are you? Why is Ben Gong addressing you as sister? Ben Gong can't afford to be called elder sister. Turning the jade bracelet on her wrist, Shin Yueji restrained the bone-piercing coldness in her eyebrows. Her voice was not angry but dignified. Empress Jijia treats the younger sisters well, right? Now that she hasn't lost her power, you're stepping on her with a proud face. If your words are heard by the emperor today, it's a small matter if your heads are taken off. If your families are implicated because of this, Ben Gong wants to see who you can cry to. The woman in green kneeling on the ground was already scared out of her wits. Her face was pale as she knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing to Shin Yueji. Imperial consort, please forgive me. Imperial consort, please forgive me. It's all this concubine's confusion. It's all this concubine's fault for speaking nonsense. I beg Imperial consort not to tell the emperor. This concubine really knows her mistake. Not only her, but all the concubines present also looked at Shin Yueji with fear in their eyes. She lowered her head and didn't dare to breathe. Shin Yueji glanced at her lightly. Since it's your first offense, Ben Gong won't ask for your name today. Slap yourself 20 times and Ben Gong will pretend I didn't hear anything. Yes, thank you Imperial consort. The green-robed woman showed a look of gratitude and slapped herself hard on the face. After 20 slaps, her face was red and swollen. She endured the pain and let the maid beside her help her up. She was really obedient and didn't dare to say a word. She hid behind the concubines and acted as if she didn't exist. Seeing Gao Dezhong come out, Shin Yueji no longer paid attention to the concubines present and walked towards Gao Dezhong. When Gao Dezhong saw her, he respectfully saluted. Imperial consort, please wait a moment, this servant will go in and report. Gao Dezhong's words made all the concubines present show jealousy and envy. Sure enough, she was worthy of being the pearl of the Shin family. Look at this treatment. They had been waiting outside for a long time, and Gao Gonggong directly told them to go back. The emperor didn't allow anyone to visit. But it was Shin Yueji. She hadn't even said anything, and he had already gone in to report. I've long heard that His Majesty treats older sister Imperial Consort very well. This rumor has spread throughout the palace. At first, this concubine didn't believe it, but I didn't expect that His Majesty's treatment of older sister Imperial Consort is truly different from this concubine. Older sister Imperial Consort really makes all the younger sisters envious. Ah. That's right, that's right. In the harem, there really isn't any elder sister who is valued by His Majesty like the Empress. In the face of the concubine's words, one after another, Shin Yueji smiled slightly. Younger sisters are being too serious. Previously, the Empress' face was injured and there was some misunderstanding between us. In addition, Ben Gong also treated the rash on Empress Jiejia's face, so it's understandable that His Majesty values Ben Gong more. It is most likely because of the Empress. Your Majesty loves the house and its crow. Imperial concubine, His Majesty invites you in. Gao Dezhong came out from inside, walked in front of Shin Yueji, and respectfully made way for her. Facing the envious and jealous gazes of the crowd, Shin Yueji calmly and elegantly walked past them. Wu Su. Chapter 123. I know what my sisters are thinking, but the Empress is the person whom the Emperor dotes on and protects. It's enough to hide some thoughts in your heart. There's no need to say it so openly, lest you lose your life. Thank you for reminding me, Imperial concubine. We will remember. All the concubines bowed respectfully. Shin Yueji smiled slightly and stepped into the hall, ignoring them. Your Majesty, my sister is back. She must be back. She came back to take revenge. Your Majesty, I'm so scared. It was my sister who did something wrong first. How could she? Empress, don't talk nonsense. On the phoenix bed, Gu Yuan's thin and helpless little body threw herself into the man's arms, sobbing. Your Majesty, you have to believe me. I really didn't do that to my sister. My relationship with my sister has always been the best. No matter what my sister did, I always remember the last sisterhood. How dare I dare to disrespect my sister? By the way, someone framed me. Someone must have framed me. Your Majesty, Yueshio and Mammy Li have been with me for so many years. I have long regarded them as my family. Now they died so tragically for no reason. Your Majesty, you must uphold justice for me and avenge them. I pay my respects to Your Majesty and Sister Empress. Gu Yuan's crying face immediately froze as a pleasant voice rang out in the hall. She looked towards the source of the voice. When she saw Shin Yueji's quiet and beautiful face, there was a vicious resentment in her eyes. Imperial concubine Shin. The three words were squeezed out of her teeth. Considering Feng Zhiqing's presence, Gu Yuan didn't show too much hostility. I heard that Sister Empress is sick, so I came to see her. Before coming in, I saw that the outside of Xianghe Palace was surrounded by many concubines. I think Sister Empress is usually friendly. When the younger sisters heard that Sister Empress is sick, they all came to see her. Huaiyang, bring up the tonic I sent to Her Majesty. Shin Yueji turned and ordered the servants behind her. Yes, Your Majesty. Huaiyang lowered his head and held the wooden box respectfully with both hands. The crimson wooden box was exquisite and small. It was made of the best nanmu. Taking the wooden box from Huaiyang's hands, Shin Yueji smiled. Your Majesty should have heard of this snow jade lotus, right? Hearing this, a hint of surprise flashed across Feng Zhiqing's clear eyes. She nodded. In the entire Feng country, there is only one snow jade lotus. It was a gift from an old man that old General Shin saved on the battlefield. It was rumored that the snow jade lotus had the effect of rejuvenating a person. It could regenerate festered skin in less than 7 days. Now that Shin Yueji had taken out the snow jade lotus, Feng Zhiqing couldn't help but feel shocked in his heart. The Gu clan and the Shin clan had similar forces in the Feng nation, and they had always been at odds with each other. The relationship between the two clans was like fire and water, and Feng Zhiqing had seen all of this. Hearing Shui Yulian, Gu Yueyin suddenly raised her head. She knew that the Shin family had a stock of snow jade lotus and she had been thinking about it for a long time. Even if her face was not ruined, if she took the snow jade lotus, then her skin would be 100 times more tender and white than usual. It could be said to be a top-notch tonic. However, due to the preciousness of the snow jade lotus, she couldn't ask for it. Even Feng Zhiqing, who usually gave in to her and spoiled her, couldn't ask for it. Chapter 124. This snow jade lotus is especially precious to the Shin family. When one knew that Empress' older sister's injuries had worsened, this Chia wrote a letter and ordered someone to bring it to the general residence. After a long time of coaxing and pestering, this snow jade lotus was finally obtained for Empress' older sister. I know that the death of Yueshio and Mammy Li made my sister sad and unacceptable. But after all, the dead can't come back to life. I believe that Yueshio and Mammy Li in heaven don't want to see the Empress like this. Sister Empress, you should be strong. After all, you are the master of the 6 palaces, and the younger sisters still rely on you. She gestured for Gao Dezhong to take the snow jade lotus from her hands. Feng Zhiqing looked at her and nodded. Imperial consort is considerate. Previously it was Ben Gong's fault. I allowed the servants at my side to be disrespectful to Shin Guifei, but Shin Guifei did not care about the past and helped Ben Gong time and time again. It is Ben Gong's fault and Ben Gong should apologize to Shin Guifei. Gu Yueyin grabbed the man's big hand and supported herself to stand up. She was about to bow to Shin Yueji. Shin Yueji was startled and quickly waved her hands. You can't do that, you can't do that. Sister Empress can't do that. You and I are both His Majesty's concubines, so we should share His Majesty's worries and difficulties. Now that Empress Jijia is injured like this, His Majesty's heart aches for you. Firstly, this Chia doesn't want His Majesty to be distracted by the matters of the Hogong. Secondly, in the days that we've been in the palace, Empress Jijia has treated this Chia sincerely. It's only natural that we help each other. Since this snow jade lotus has been delivered, this concubine will return first. Big Sister Empress should recuperate first. Your Majesty, please accompany Big Sister Empress. Huaiyang, follow me back. Shin Yueji bowed slightly and got up to leave. However, after she called out, she realized that the person behind her didn't move. She was surprised and couldn't help but call out again. The person kneeling on the ground still did not move. She became impatient and turned around. Huaiyang, have you turned a deaf ear to my words? How dare you be so presumptuous in front of His Majesty and the Empress? Your Majesty, please help this servant. Huaiyang suddenly shouted, his voice was deafening. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily towards Feng Zhiqing. His bright and clean head smashed into the hard floor, and not long after, it turned red. The sudden scene caused Shin Yueji to be somewhat dumbfounded. Even Gu Yueyin's expression changed. Her gaze was locked onto Huaiyang. She felt that this face was familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere before, but she couldn't remember who it was. Feng Zhiqing's gentle countenance turned gloomy as he looked at the little eunuch who was kowtowing on the ground. What decision do you want us to make? How dare you? You little eunuch have no manners. Yesterday, you carelessly knocked over Nyang Nyang's tea set. Nyang Nyang saw your uneasy appearance and felt sympathy, so she kept you by her side. Originally, she wanted to support you well, so she allowed you to come to Xianghe Palace to visit Empress. Who would have thought that you would do such a thing to my Nyang Nyang? After saying that, Shuangxi knelt on the ground angrily. Without waiting for the little eunuch to finish, she gritted her teeth and said righteously, "Your Majesty, this little eunuch was just kept by this servant's Nyang yesterday. Now that he's seen Your Majesty, he's clamoring for Your Majesty to help him. He must be a spy that one of the palace's Nyang had arranged to harm this servant's Nyang. Your Majesty, please investigate clearly." Chapter 125. She felt the man's scrutinizing eyes on her. Shin Yueji hurriedly lifted her skirt and knelt on the ground. "Your Majesty, I still don't know what happened, and it's not good for me to defend myself. Take him away." Two secret guards in black pressed Hua Yang under their bodies and were ready to take him away. A glint flashed across Shin Yueji's pitch-black eyes. She was unsure of it. Feng Zhiqing didn't give him a chance to speak and directly ordered people to take him away. Was he protecting him? Because no one knew what the little eunuch was going to say after he spoke. She clenched her fists. "Emperor, this minister's concubine is not afraid of a crooked shadow. Since this little eunuch asked the emperor to help him, then he must have some grievances. This minister's concubine also wants to hear it. This minister's concubine has no grudges with him and has never offended him. How exactly does he want to frame this minister's concubine? I beg Your Majesty to give this concubine some face and allow him to continue speaking, to return this concubine's innocence." Feng Zhiqing looked at her with disapproval in her eyes. Sometimes, once some words were spoken, it would be difficult to take them back. No matter what this eunuch wanted to say, he just needed to order people to take him away and kill him. No matter what bad words he said, it would have nothing to do with her. But once he opened his mouth, he couldn't protect her directly if it was something that was disadvantageous to her. He had always been clear about the intrigues in the harem, but he didn't point it out and let them do whatever they wanted. But Shin Yueji gave him a different feeling. He really wanted to protect her. "Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine's sister is right. Since this eunuch said that he was wronged, Your Majesty should let him speak. If you continue to drag him away like this, it will be bad for Imperial Concubine's sister's reputation when people in the palace find out. They will mistakenly think that she has something to hide. I believe that according to Imperial Concubine's sister's character, she will never allow such a reputation to be hung on her head." Gu Yueyin grasped his hand, and there were still a few drops of tears in her almond-shaped eyes. "Your Majesty, I believe Imperial Concubine's sister." Feng Zhiqing withdrew his hand from the woman's hands, got up, walked to the tea table not far away, and sat down. "Imperial Concubine." "Ah." Shin Yueji lifted her head and looked at the emperor with a confused expression when she was suddenly called. She saw the man stretch out his hand towards her. His fair hand was long and slender, and his handsome face was as handsome as the wind. His good-looking thin lips parted slightly, and the word "gentle" came out of his mouth. "Come here." A sharp gaze came from her right, nailing her body like a knife. Every part of her body was in extreme pain. A smile appeared on Shin Yueji's face and she pretended not to see Gu Yuein's expression. She excitedly climbed up from the ground and quickly walked in front of the emperor. She placed her small hand on his palm. "Your Majesty, you and elder sister Empress both believe in this concubine, right?" Pulling a round chair for her, the man pressed her to sit beside him. "Sit properly." The man's large hand rested on the back of the woman's hand, lightly tapping it. His indifferent gaze looked towards Hua Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. "Since the Empress and Guifei are pleading for you, Shen will give you this chance to speak." "Speak." Hearing this, Hua Yang's face lit up, and he kowtowed several times. "This servant admits that this servant did use my tragic life to win Imperial Concubine's sympathy yesterday, but what this servant is going to say next has nothing to do with Imperial Concubine." Hua Yang's words made the emperor's furrowed brows relax for a moment. For some reason, when he heard that it had nothing to do with Shinyueji, he actually relaxed a lot. He released Shinyueji's hand, pulled her up from the round chair, and pushed her forward. Imperial concubine, go to the side and stand. Chapter 126. Shinyueji grimaced and glared at him secretly. Coincidentally, the emperor raised his eyes and glanced at her. She was so scared that she quickly recovered her well-behaved appearance. She walked to Shuangxi's side and stood there aggrievedly. The emperor fixed his eyes on her for a while and then looked at Huai Yang. Go on. Seeing this scene, Gu Yueyin couldn't help but clench her fists under the phoenix robe. Her bright eyes were tainted with resentment. She was a little proud in her heart, but when she heard Huai Yang say that it had nothing to do with her, she had a bad premonition and clenched her fists tighter and tighter. Gu Yueyin looked at the emperor softly. I want to talk about, is the eunuch of Her Majesty's Xianghe Palace, Eunuch Tang. Gu Yueyin trembled when she heard the words, Eunuch Tang. No wonder she felt Huai Yang was familiar. Now, she finally knew who he was. Was it Huai Yang who was disfigured and skinned by Tang Kai? It was him. How could it be him? Why did he work in Shinyueji's Feng Qi Palace? For a moment, her face was full of colors, changing rapidly and extremely ugly. Gu Yuan's lips trembled when she saw the emperor's gaze fall on her. Her expression was full of helplessness. Your Majesty, Eunuch Tang is indeed my servant in the auspicious Harmony Palace. I don't know what Eunuch Tang has done to make you use Imperial Consort sympathy to see His Majesty in person and beg His Majesty to help you. After saying that, she gave a pale smile. I didn't remember it just now. If I remember correctly, you should have worked in my Xianghe Palace before, right? Because you made a mistake, Eunuch Tang ordered people to beat you with a board and drive you out. At this time, without Yu Xiao and Mammy Li, Gu Yuan realized how powerless she was to speak. If they were alive, they would have already defended her. I didn't make a mistake. It was Tang Kai, that beast. Your Majesty. Huai Yang's body trembled hard. Tang Kai, that beast, forced all the beautiful palace maids in Xianghe Palace to eat with him. Not only that, he didn't even let off the eunuchs. This face of your servant is impudent. Gu Yuan scolded in a low voice. Huai Yang was so frightened that he immediately fell silent. Gu Yuan exuded a dignified aura, and her face, which was hidden under the veil, was filled with a cold intent. What do you take my auspicious Harmony Palace for? Eunuch Tang was personally promoted by this empress, how could he do such a despicable thing? Huai Yang, have you forgotten how you were chased out by this consort? Your Majesty, Huai Yang is a narrow-minded person. At that time, he had only done something wrong and was reprimanded by Tang Kai and bore a grudge against him, causing him to be embarrassed many times. Tang Kai was kind and only chased him out of Xianghe Palace and did not take his life. This official concubine did not think that this Huai Yang would use just a few words to win noble consort Shin's trust and use noble consort Shin to meet your Majesty to frame Tang eunuch. I didn't. If your Highness the Empress doesn't believe me, you can summon Tang Kai over for a face-to-face confrontation. Gu Yuan sneered, what harm is there in that? Ben Gong would like to see how a selfish villain like you can measure the heart of a gentleman. Guards. Chapter 127. Servant Tang Kai greets your Majesty, Empress, and Imperial Consort. The one who came in was a middle-aged man with an exquisite appearance. Why was he called a man? It was because his temperament was different from those eunuchs in the palace who were over 50 years old and had some power. He was tall and slender, with a fair face and didn't look old. It was hard for such a person to be called a eunuch. In comparison, he looked more like the master of an aristocratic family. A young master of an aristocratic family. When she saw Tang Kai, Shin Yueji was a little surprised. Especially since he was neither servile nor overbearing, giving off an aura of victory. She thought to herself that if he wasn't fully prepared, he wouldn't have such an expression. It seemed like Hua Yang was going to suffer. Without her, he probably wouldn't be able to keep his life. It's him. It's him. Compared to Tang Kai's gentleness, when Hua Yang saw him, he was very agitated. His face was filled with fear as he pointed at him and trembled. There are many maids and eunuchs in the palace who were tortured by him. They were all unwilling to eat with him. If your majesty doesn't believe this servant, you can call them over and have a face-to-face confrontation. Previously, I only hit you a few dozen times because you did something wrong. I didn't expect you to hold a grudge against me until now. In front of your majesty and empress, you're slandering me. You can even make up such a shameful thing to frame me and humiliate me. Your majesty, this servant has been in the palace for so many years and has never done anything over the line. Since he has spoken to this extent, why don't your majesty summon all the people that he said had an affair with this servant and confront them face to face? Let's see if this servant is really as he said, that he has done all sorts of bad things in the inner palace. The space between the emperor's brows was gloomy. His warm and moist lips were cold and tightly pressed together like ice. His dark eyes made people not dare to look at him directly. He waved his hand. Gao Dezhong memorized the names of the eunuchs and maids in Xianghe Palace from Hua Yang's mouth. Not long after, the people Hua Yang spat out were all brought into the main hall. They were all trembling in fear. They had never seen such a scene before. They knelt on the ground with pale faces. Eunuch Tang has been very good to us. Because a few days ago, Hua Yang accidentally knocked over the Empress's most treasured glass cup and was beaten by Eunuch Tang. He has always held a grudge against Eunuch Tang, so he spoke nonsense and deliberately framed Eunuch Tang. Your Majesty, our words are absolutely true. Eunuch Tang and the Empress are the same. Eunuch Tang and Empress, we have never treated us as servants and has always been very good to us. Eunuch Tang and Eunuch Tang. In the face of everyone's rebuttals and accusations of his wrongdoings, he didn't dare to do so. Hua Yang's lips were pale, and he murmured dully, "It's not like that, it's not like that. That's not what you said at that time. Lil Hua Zi, you said that Tang Kai forced you, took off your clothes, and beat you. You said that Tang Kai bit off the flesh on your chest, and you were in so much pain that you couldn't get out of bed for a few days. Literally, did you forget how you were lying on the bed covered in blood and I carried you out? You said your life here was worse than death. You said you wanted to escape, you little Zhang. Enough." Chapter 128. Everyone in the room was silent. Hua Yang fell to the ground in a daze. He didn't seem to understand how things had developed to this point. They had agreed that as long as he had the chance, he would tell everyone about Tang Kai's evil deeds. They had agreed that they would help him prove it. It was just death. Instead of living like this, they would rather fight to the death. But why didn't they admit it? Why did they keep blaming him? He was helping them, helping them. Feng Zhiqing's handsome face was calm, and his crimson lips opened slightly. What else do you have to say? Hua Yang clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and his lips were bleeding. His eyes were full of stubbornness. I still have evidence. There is a secret room under Tang Kai's residence. It is filled with his torture tools, and there are many skeletons of the palace maids and eunuchs who were imprisoned by him. Eunuch Tang. Your Highness, I am here. Gu Yuan raised her eyebrows. Did you hear what he said? Yes, I heard it. Tang Kai had a smile on his face as he looked at Huai Yang as if he was looking at someone who was about to die. Gu Yuan sighed softly. No matter what happened in the past, you are now a servant of the Phoenix Perch Palace. Since Imperial Consort Shen brought you here and Ben Gong owes Imperial Consort Shen many favors, Ben Gong will trust you once more for Imperial Consort Shen's sake. Since you said there is a secret room in Eunuch Tang's residence, I will bring people to follow you to confirm it. Huai Yang, if there is no secret room, this time, not only His Majesty, but I will also demand an explanation for Eunuch Tang. Huai Yang wiped the tears on his face and climbed up from the ground. I will prove to His Majesty that I did not lie. There is indeed a secret room in Tang Kai's residence. I will take His Majesty to see it now. Wait. Shen Yueji suddenly spoke when Huai Yang's voice fell. Huai Yang suddenly stopped and looked back at Shen Yueji. You are just a little servant. Are you worthy of His Majesty to follow you to the residence of a eunuch? What do you think His Majesty is? His Majesty is the sovereign of the 9-5. How could he be ordered around by servants like you? Right, Your Majesty. At this point, Shen Yueji winked at the emperor. Feng Jiuqing's expression was originally displeased, but after hearing Shen Yueji's words, he helplessly held his forehead. Imperial consort, don't be rude. Of course, this servant is also human. Plus, if what Huai Yang said is true, then many of the eunuchs and palace maids in Auspicious Harmony Palace have been poisoned by Eunuch Tang. Since Elder Sister Empress is the mistress of Auspicious Harmony Palace, then Elder Sister Empress has failed in her duty. Seeing Gu Yuan's ugly expression, Shen Yueji smiled faintly. Although this concubine's words aren't very pleasant to hear, they are also reasonable. If this had happened in this concubine's Phoenix Perch Palace, it would be the same. Seeing how Elder Sister Empress was defending Eunuch Tang, it seemed that she didn't know anything. When I was in the Fu, father and mother often nagged in my ears, you may know a person's face, but you don't know his heart. Since Eunuch Tang feels that he is righteous, he naturally isn't afraid that Huai Yang will lead his men to search. Chapter 129. Then, this consort is also willing to be punished together with Huai Yang, to show this consort's guilt of judging someone unkind, and to spare Big Sister Empress cultivation. This matter concerns me as well as Sister Empress's responsibility to protect Eunuch Tang. With these two reasons, it's no longer condescending to invite Your Majesty to visit Eunuch Tang's residence. What do you think, Your Majesty? Feng Jiuqing's eyes flickered as he stared at her smiling face. This girl. He got up and brushed his dragon robe with his beautiful fingers. As Imperial Concubine said, it's rare for me to be free. I'll go with you to Tang Kai's residence. Gu Yuan's face was injured, so she couldn't go there. Her gaze met with Tang Kai's, and when she received a reassuring look from him, her lips curled up into a smile, and she ordered one of her close attendants to go in her place. Huai Yang is young and he is very vengeful. Not only does he lie, but he also wants to put people to death. It's hard for such a ruthless person to deceive the kind and innocent Imperial concubine. Since Imperial Consort Mimi has the intention to seek justice for him, Ben Gong can't say anything. Let His Majesty be the witness. If we go to Eunuch Tang's residence and we don't see what Huai Yang said, this concubine will be guilty of covering up and will be left to His Majesty and Empress Jijie to decide. Feng Jiuqing held her hand and walked out. Before leaving the hall, he paused and pursed his lips. Ignorant people are not guilty. Imperial concubine can't be considered as covering up. The man's words made Gu Yuan raise her head and look at him in disbelief. The emperor's tall and slender body had already walked out of the hall, and his clothes were ugly. Gu Yuan bit her lips so hard that they bled. Her deep eyes were filled with viciousness. Shen Yueji had only been in the palace for half a month, and he was so protective of her. First Gu Yueyin, then Shen Yueji. Her long nails dug into her palms, and drops of blood dyed the brocade quilt red. The pungent smell of blood made Gu Yueyin absent-minded. She tried so hard to get rid of Gu Yueqin, to get rid of her biological sister and replace her. She would never forget how long he had ignored her on the day of Gu Yueqin's death. He drank alone until he was dead drunk. She was worried about him and went to persuade him. If she hadn't been prepared, he would have killed her long ago. Later, because of her father and mother entering the palace, she didn't know what they did to him, but he finally started to like her. The rims of Gu Yueyin's eyes reddened. Everyone in the palace knew that she was favored. They knew that ever since he ascended to the throne, he had been staying in her Xianghe palace every day. When the concubines talked, they were all envious and jealous. But only he himself knew. What had he been doing all these nights? In front of him, a beautiful woman like a flower could not compare to a dead man. Gu Yueyin smashed her fist on the pillow. Her small hand instantly swelled up and dark red blood flowed down the edge of the pillow. In order to get him, she really couldn't care less about the last bit of modesty of a woman. In the end, what she got in return was an understatement from him. "Empress, it's cold. Put on your clothes and be careful not to catch a cold." Even so, Gu Yueyin refused to admit defeat. Gu Yueqin was already dead. The one who would accompany him now was her, Gu Yueyin. Even if he hadn't touched her, so what? There was still a long time. Although he hadn't touched her, he hadn't taken a step into the chambers of the concubines in the inner palace. At least in the eyes of others, the emperor stayed at her place every night and was devoted to her. The two of them were deeply in love. This was enough. Chapter 130. But Shen Yueji's appearance, Gu Yueyin's cold eyes suddenly narrowed. A dangerous aura spread around her. How could he be so gentle and protective of her? She would never forget the way he looked at Shen Yueji. Even if she died, she would never forget it. That could only be seen on Gu Yueqin. Even on her, his gentleness had never appeared. He seemed to be affectionate, but in the depths of his gentle eyes, there was indifference and hatred. He didn't love her. He didn't. Shen Yu-ji. The coldness in his eyes burst out layer by layer. She was obviously not a person to be feared. Why did the emperor suddenly treat her so well? What kind of magical power did she have? Or was it just because of her beautiful face? "Your Highness, third young master asks for an audience." The maid's voice brought Gu Yueyin back to reality. Her ferocious and terrifying face slowly returned to normal. She looked at the maid kneeling on the ground carefully. "Third brother." "Your Majesty." On the way, Shen Yueji watched the dragon carriage stop. Gao Dezhong suddenly went forward and leaned over to the emperor's ear and said a few words. "I don't know where the courage comes from." Shen Yueji puts her little head over, but before she can get close to the king, her head is held by the man's beautiful big hand. She can't get close, so she can only retreat with a sad face and sit down. The emperor's expression didn't change. After listening to Gao Dezhong's words, his gaze fell on her little face that was full of resentment. Shen Yueji turned her head away awkwardly. Nothing. The Empress' third brother came to the palace. Sister Empress' third brother. Gu Jinqi. Shen Yueji's words made the emperor frown. "Your Highness, you know the Gu family's third young master." "Oh," Shen Yueji scratched her head and smiled awkwardly. "We should be familiar with each other. When I was in the capital with Big Brother, we met a hooligan who was molesting a woman, so we taught him a good lesson. Later, we found out that the person we beat up was the Gu family's third young master. Hee. Feng Zhiqing wasn't the emperor back then, and the Gu family wasn't as powerful as they were now. The feud between the Gu and Shen families had always existed. Gu Yuanqi had been beaten black and blue in the past, so how could the Gu family let them off so easily? However, these are all old matters of mine. Shin Yueji rubbed her chin. Then, she thought of something and her expression turned ugly. Noticing the change in her mood, Feng Zhiqing felt rather helpless. What's wrong with Imperial Consort? Why is it that Empress Jiejia's older brother can enter and leave the Imperial Palace as he pleases, but why is it that this Chia's older brother was only allowed to enter the Imperial Palace to see this Chia once after this Chia pleaded with the Emperor? Feng Zhiqing glanced at her lazily. When did I say that I only need you to meet Shin Yueji? You didn't tell me. Shin Yueji pondered over Feng Zhiqing's words seriously. She recalled the day when she asked Feng Zhiqing to allow Shin Yueji to enter the palace. Feng Zhiqing had indeed agreed to her request and did not say that they would only meet once. In that case, Shin Yueji's eyes lit up, and she grabbed the Emperor's hand. Does this mean that this Chia's older brother will be able to enter the Imperial Palace freely to see me like Empress Jijie? Chapter 131. Shin Yueji didn't care about his status or etiquette. She just wanted to prove to Feng Zhiqing that her guess was right or not. She grabbed the Emperor's hand with her claws again. Feng Zhiqing tried to brush her hand away but failed. He looked into her sparkling eyes and corrected her. I can only enter and exit your Phoenix Perch Palace, not the palace. What? Shin Yueji pouted. My brother is a gentleman. Your Majesty, are you suspecting that my brother can do anything to your Majesty's beauties? Feng Zhiqing twisted his fingers and held her hand in his palm. He said with a faint smile, I'm afraid that your son's attire will scare the people in the palace. Shin Yueji was speechless. Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine, we've arrived at Tang Kai's residence. Shin Yueji had been silent all along the way except for the few words she exchanged with the man. She had a feeling that Gu Ruoqi's sudden entry into the palace had something to do with her. The Emperor was sitting next to her. He could see her every move, but she couldn't make it too obvious. After hearing Gao Dezhong's words, she raised her head and looked at Tang Kai's residence. In the palace, all the concubines, eunuchs, and palace maids lived in a palace that was not far from their bedchambers. It represented their identity and status. Only the concubines, eunuchs, and palace maids would live in the same temple and temple. It was said that Tang Kai's palace was personally given to him by Gu Yueyin. Compared to the bedchambers of the concubines, his palace was incomparable. But compared to the residence of the eunuchs and the palace maids who had some power in the palace, his palace was undoubtedly luxurious. Just one person's residence was enough to support 3 palace's servants. Sure enough, when she saw the displeasure in the Emperor's eyes, Shin Yueji followed behind the Emperor and got off the dragon carriage without saying a word. Tang Kai had been in the palace for so many years that he was very good at reading people's expressions. He saw the expression on the Emperor's face without a change. He hurriedly bowed. This palace is bestowed by the Empress. There are many rare treasures inside, and it is also the Empress' high regard for this servant. This servant has always been afraid and has never dared to live in this palace. Most of the time, I have stayed in a small side hall of the Empress' palace in case the Empress summons me and delay time. Tang then knew the position the Empress held in the Emperor's heart and specially used her name to block it. Seeing that the displeasure between the Emperor's brows had dissipated a little, he let out a long breath and took the lead to lead the way. Shin Yueji followed behind the Emperor and found a place to sit. Gao Dezhong cleared his throat and looked towards the trembling Huai Yang. According to what you said, His Majesty and the Imperial Consort are both here. Since you said that Eunuch Tang has a secret room, let's take a look. Huai Yang crawled up from the ground and walked towards Tang Kai. He passed by Tang Kai's side and received a disdainful and proud look. The fear that came from his heart caused his expression to tense up. The decorations inside the hall were not as grand and luxurious as the ones outside. There were signs that it had been moved. Even some of the items on the bookshelves had been burned. It looked like it had been adjusted in advance. She carefully observed everything in the hall. A short while later, Shin Yueji's gaze looked towards Hua Yang. She saw him walk behind a bookshelf. There was a painting hanging on the right side of the bookshelf. He pointed at the painting with a trembling hand. Chapter 132. A top-notch splash ink landscape painting. Shin Yueji smiled slightly. What's here? The switch to the secret room is here, Hua Yang said with certainty. This servant has come to this place several times. Every time Tang Kai brought this servant here, he would first lift up the painting and turn the switch inside. The bookshelf would then move away. The emperor nodded slightly. A black-robed bodyguard stepped forward and lifted the scroll. The smooth wall was no different from the color outside the painting. The black-clothed guard dutifully stretched out his hand and touched the wall behind the painting. It was smooth and did not seem to have any mechanism. He took the painting down, and the clean and neat wall looked no different from the one beside it. Seeing the scene in front of him, Hua Yang's eyes widened. On the other hand, Tang Kai could not hide his smugness. How could this be? Hua Yang's eyes widened in shock, and he ran over in disbelief. His hands kept moving on the clean wall, looking for something. It shouldn't be like this. I remember very clearly that there was a round lion's head under the painting. As long as the lion's head was turned, the secret room on the bookshelf would open. Why is it gone? How dare you, Hua Yang? Tang Kai scolded angrily. At that time, I saw that you were being bullied at such a young age. It was very pitiful, so I kept you by my side. In addition, you were smart and nimble, so I originally planned to put you in an important position and promote you. I wanted to give you more opportunities so that you wouldn't just be an obscure little eunuch. I didn't expect that you would actually frame me in front of His Majesty and Imperial Consort Nyang. Your Majesty. Imperial Concubine. Now that the truth has been revealed, I really don't have any secret room here. Your Majesty and Imperial Concubine, you must help me. I have been working hard and loyal in the palace all these years. How could I have done such a disgraceful, shameless, and vicious thing? No, it's not like that. Your Majesty, don't listen to his nonsense. I saw it with my own eyes. Half of my face was ruined by him. He scalded it and peeled it off my face. Your Majesty, I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. Your Majesty, you have to believe me. Hua Yang frantically crawled up from the ground and ran to the bookshelf. He frantically searched the bookshelf with his hands. Countless books fell to the ground, and porcelain vases shattered into pieces. He messed up the bookshelves. The hard and smooth wall was no different from the other walls. He slammed his hands on the wall. His clenched fists were bleeding, but he still slammed them hard. Fresh blood flowed down the clean wall, a ghastly sight. It must be here, it must be here, it's empty. It's empty. Feng Juqing sat on the round chair without moving. Shin Yueji looked at him. The man's elegant appearance was surprisingly calm, and his gentle and elegant eyes were clear and elegant. His slender fingers lightly tapped on the table, knocking on it from time to time. Even Shin Yueji couldn't figure out what Feng Juqing was trying to do. Your Majesty. The man raised his hand slightly. She immediately shut her mouth when she saw this. Only the sound of Hua Yang's fists smashing against the walls with all his might could be heard in the huge palace, and the sound of his fists could be described as deafening. Chapter 133. It was as if he couldn't feel the pain. The only truth of the matter, the only chance to prove his innocence and expose Tang Kai's crimes. Even if he died, he would never have thought that things would turn out like this. All his hopes were shattered at this moment. He practically didn't need to turn around to be able to imagine Tang Kai's complacent face. Yes, he was an old man in the palace after all. When the late emperor was alive, no one could compare to his position in the harem. After the death of the late emperor and the ascension of the new emperor, he followed the empress and was deeply valued by the empress. He was just a little eunuch who had entered the palace for less than a year. How could he be compared to his power in the harem? In the huge Xianghe palace, all the servants listened to his orders. They were all his eyes. Even the servants outside the Xianghe palace didn't dare to offend him. His every move was seen by him. Before he came, he had already made full preparations. All the explanations and excuses were useless in the end. Huai Yang fell down dispiritedly. He should have known this would happen, he should have known. Shen Yueji poured a cup of tea for the man and handed it over. She said lightly, "Huai Yang, what else do you have to say now?" Huai Yang fell to the ground powerlessly. His soul was sucked out and he was like a puppet. You framed eunuch Tang for eating with the servants of Xianghe Palace. You lied that Tang Kai killed the palace maids and eunuchs of Xianghe Palace. It has been proven time and time again, but it has been broken. Now, what evidence do you have to frame eunuch Tang? I know that no matter what I say now, the imperial concubine and His Majesty won't believe my words. But I dare to swear to God that if there is any falsehood in what I said, I will die a horrible death. I will die without a corpse. Hearing this, Shen Yueji laughed. The harem is not a place for you to swear. What can your oath represent? She sighed softly. In front of the truth, the more you say, the easier it is to be sneered at. The so-called truth, if people have complete confidence, they won't dare to point it out with confidence. Not to mention you, a person who bites the hand that feeds him and talks nonsense. I am not talking nonsense. Everything this servant has said is the truth, not a single word of falsehood. Huai Yang's emotions were agitated. The moment he suddenly stood up and pounced towards Tang Kai, he was restrained by the black-clothed guards beside him. He struggled with all his might, his eyes filled with hatred. Tang Kai, do you dare to swear? Do you dare to swear to God that you've never done these things? Tang Kai sneered, your servant is upright and not afraid of a crooked shadow, why wouldn't I dare? Double happiness. This servant is here. Slap yourself 30 times. Yes. Taking advantage of the time when double happiness came forward, Shen Yueji poured another cup of tea for the man. You dare to be so impudent in front of His Majesty and Ben Gong. It seems that Empress Jijia was right, you really don't know the rules. These 30 slaps will be a lesson for you. After 30 slaps, Huai Yang's face swelled up, the corners of his mouth split open, and dark red blood flowed out from the corners of his mouth. He stretched out his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He knelt on the ground, his body in a sorry state. Your servant knows his wrongs. Double happiness. Your Highness. Give him another 20 slaps, let him remember the consequences of using Ben Gong. Yes. Chapter 134. Your Majesty, as this concubine servant of Phoenix Perch Palace, this concubine has punished and vented my anger. Next, it's up to Empress Sister. You decide. Feng Jiuqing elegantly took a sip of tea and turned a deaf ear to her words. His slender fingers gently twisted the lid of the teacup. After a moment, he said, since Imperial Concubine said that he is a servant of Feng Qi Palace, then let Imperial Concubine deal with him personally. Your Majesty, Tang Kai could not believe what he heard. Until the emperor's gloomy eyes looked at him, Tang Kai's heart skipped a beat and he quickly lowered his head. Yes. Yes. Your Majesty is right. No matter how bad Huaiyang is, he is still a servant of Imperial Concubine Feng Qi Palace. Imperial Concubine has always been fair in dealing with things. I believe that Imperial Concubine will give me a satisfactory answer. Isn't Your Majesty making things difficult for me? Although I come from a family of generals, I have never killed anyone. This Huaiyang offended his superiors and dared to speak arrogantly in front of Your Majesty. He has already been sentenced to death. Shen Yueji held the man's hand and said in a coquettish tone, Your Majesty, if you let me deal with him, I will be afraid. Feng Jiuqing looked down at her. There was a smile between his handsome eyebrows. Taking advantage of him, Shen Yueji stood up straight and walked in front of Huaiyang. She looked down at his swollen and blood-stained face from above. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Tang Kai who was kneeling on the side. Since this is a grudge between you two, eunuch Tang, how do you want me to deal with it? The spearhead was thrown to him. For a moment, Tang Kai was also in a dilemma. This reckless Huaiyang dared to report his scandal to the emperor. As long as he did not die, there would be a second time. With the empress protecting him, he was not afraid. But he was also an old man in the palace, so he naturally knew this principle. If he asked Shen Yueji to get rid of him, it would mean that he did not put Imperial Concubine Shen in his eyes and did not give her any face. Almost with this sentence, Tang Kai concluded that this Imperial Concubine Shen was not simple. He knelt on the ground and when he heard that, he raised his head in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Shen Guifei treats people benevolently and there is no lack of servants by her side. This Huaiyang first held a position in the Empress Auspicious Harmony Palace, but because this servant criticized him a few times, he bore a grudge against this servant and wanted this servant dead. It doesn't matter if this servant's reputation suffers a bit of damage, but this matter is related to the noble consort. If one day, Huaiyang does something wrong and is reprimanded by the noble consort, at that time, it would be hard for this person to not remember the noble consort's kindness and bite back, causing the noble consort to fall into danger. Shen Yueji smiled faintly. It was my negligence that almost caused eunuch Tang to lose his life. I didn't think that eunuch Tang not only didn't feel estranged from me, but also thought about my safety in the future. This is truly worthy of gratitude. Tang Kai said with a fawning smile, What is Imperial Consort Nyang saying? Imperial Consort Nyang was also bewitched by this servant and blinded. Imperial Consort Nyang has a kind heart, how can this servant be disrespectful? The palace that Empress Jijia bestowed upon you was destroyed by Huaiyang. It is truly a pity. Looking at the large pool of blood on the clean wall, there were also many small pieces of flesh that fell from the back of Huaiyang's hand stuck to it. It could be seen how much strength he used to smash the wall. Chapter 135. Huaiyang, are you treating me and His Majesty as fools? If there's a secret room inside, how can the wall be so thick? You've punched it several times, but this hard stone wall isn't damaged at all. Why don't you grow some brains when you've spent so much effort to frame eunuch Tang? Huaiyang's face was pale. Facing Shen Yueji's seemingly indifferent reprimand, he lowered his head and restrained the hatred and anger in his eyes. As she spoke, Shen Yueji walked towards another wall. This wall looked no different from the previous one. It was clean and spotless, and there were no extra decorations on it. It looked just like a wall. On the contrary, Tang Kai's expression changed when he saw her suddenly walking towards that wall. Something flashed across his pitch-black eyes. Shen Yueji caught it very quickly. It was a kind of fear called panic. Her beautiful lips curved into a smile, and her hand carelessly touched the wall. Eunuch Tang's palace looks quite unique. Tang Kai lowered his head shakily, not wanting her to see the fear on his face. He said respectfully, "This palace is a gift from Her Majesty. Her Majesty has always liked simple and elegant places, so it's naturally unique. Although Huai-Yang is one of my people, he did something wrong after all and offended eunuch Tang. Just now, I had double happiness beat him, which can be considered as a punishment for deceiving me. Next is the personal grudge between him and eunuch Tang. If I punish him lightly, I will feel sorry for eunuch Tang. But if I punish him heavily, Huai-Yang can't escape death, and I really don't want to kill people." So, she changed the topic. "Eunuch Tang, don't refuse. Tell me directly. Do you want to kill him or torture him in some way? Only then will it be enough to vent your anger." Tang Kai could understand the first part of the sentence, but the latter part made him have a bad feeling. He knelt on the ground and tried to keep his voice calm. This servant doesn't understand what Imperial Consort Tang wants to say. Huai-Yang, heat, rumble, a deafening sound caused Tang Kai to abruptly stop speaking. His face, which was covered in white powder, turned completely pale when he saw that the secret room on the wall had been opened. As the wall moved to the left and right, Shin Yueji didn't know where her hand had touched. Seeing the scene in front of her, she quickly retracted her hand in shock and jogged back to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, why did the wall split by itself? What did I just do? It's here. This is the place." Huai-Yang excitedly crawled up from the ground when he saw the secret room open. His bruised and swollen face was once again filled with hope. "It's here." He excitedly pointed at the secret room, those corpses, those palace maids and eunuchs that were tortured by Tang Kai, they are all inside. If Your Majesty and Imperial Consort Shin do not believe, you can personally go in and take a look. Everything in here can prove Tang Kai's evil deeds. Your Majesty, Imperial Consort Shin, you can't listen to his nonsense. This secret room is where the servants usually pile up their junk. There really isn't anything here. Tang Kai couldn't care less about etiquette and rules. He frantically climbed up from the ground and pressed down on the other side of the wall with both hands. He then saw the secret room that had just been opened close up at a slow speed with a creaking sound. Tang Kai's head was full of sweat and he could no longer maintain his calm. Chapter 136. Feng Zhiqing's handsome face was expressionless as he raised his hand. The black-clothed guard pushed Tang Kai away and pressed his hand on the place he had just pressed. The secret room opened again. The Emperor stood up. Tang Kai felt completely panicked this time. He crawled to the door of the secret room and tried to block the entrance. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Before he could block the secret room, his body was lifted by the black-clothed guard and thrown far away. Tang Kai wanted to crawl again, but a sharp blade was placed on his neck. He moved slightly and the sharp blade slashed across his neck. There was a sharp pain on his neck and red blood flowed down his neck. He was so scared that he lay on the ground and did not dare to move. Huai-Yang walked in front and led the way. His voice was trembling with excitement. Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine, please follow me. Shin Yueji wanted to refuse, but in the next moment, her hand was pulled by the Emperor's big hand. She wanted to struggle. Your Majesty, I am timid. If what Huai-Yang said is true, I am afraid that I will not be able to sleep at night if I really see the tragedy inside. Imperial Concubine made a mess, how can I help you clean it up? Your Majesty, you must believe me. I really touched it by accident. I don't know where I touched. How would I know that there is a secret room here? The Emperor looked at her with his dark eyes and did not speak. Shin Yueji felt wronged and pouted. Your Majesty, you don't believe me. Whether I believe you or not, I will not do anything to you. What are you wronged about? Feng Zhiqing laughed. He did not give her a chance to complain. Go in and see. She was pulled into the secret room by the emperor. On the way, Shen Yueji stood still. The emperor was not angry and chuckled. Does imperial concubine want me to carry you in? Hearing this, Shen Yueji's body stiffened. She could only follow behind the emperor and let him lead her like a dog. Later, Shen Yueji realized that she did not need the emperor to lead her and quickly caught up. The emperor did not walk fast, but Shen Yueji struggled to catch up. She ran hard to catch up, but the emperor suddenly stopped moving. Her nose hit the emperor's back and she immediately covered her nose in pain. The man's body was tall and straight, not moving an inch. She sensed that something was wrong and walked past Feng Zhiqing to stand beside him. When she saw the group of naked men and women tied to the wooden pillars and beds in the secret chamber, she felt a chill run down her spine. Shen Yueji had clearly imagined what it would be like inside, but when she saw it, she realized how much her heart was stirred. They were stripped of their clothes. Those who were locked up in the secret room did not have anything covering their bodies. Their bodies were full of scars. Their clean chests had traces of being whipped, and even the area between their legs, the only thing that was clean was their faces. Regardless of whether they were palace maids or eunuchs, every one of them could be considered delicate and beautiful. Their mouths were stuffed with cloth strips, and their faces were sticky with their tears. Their arrival caused their dejected and helpless mood to suddenly become excited. Their crippled arms trembled, and their thighs that were missing a leg kept struggling. The stench of blood here wasn't very strong. Only after experiencing Tang Kai's inhumane torture would the stench of blood fill the sky and cover the earth. And every time after the end, Tang Kai would personally clean up the mess. Most of these imprisoned palace maids and eunuchs were not forced by him. Chapter 137. The more they struggled, the more they resisted. He used the whip to lash their bodies. Some of them struggled too hard and hurt him. He directly cut off an arm or a leg from their body. Shen Yueji looked at the pretty palace maid with nails in her eyes. Her mouth was gagged and only her ears were trembling as she listened to the movements around her. She felt that the emperor's gaze was on the palace maid with nails in her eyes, just like her. She was lost in thought for a long time. There was a hint of coldness on his clear face. It was as if the warm summer had suddenly turned into winter, and the warm spring water had frozen in an instant. The temperature in the secret room was not cold, but the anger and majesty that emanated from the emperor made the atmosphere in the secret room drop to the lowest point. There was a numbness that made people tremble in fear. Shen Yueji was the closest to Feng Zhiqing. She could feel the endless anger that emanated from his body. When a gentleman who treated others warmly and rarely lost his temper, once he lost his temper, no one would be able to endure his rage. She would not forget that the man in front of her was not just Feng Zhiqing. He was a man. He was also the emperor of Feng country, the only emperor in the world. He controlled the life and death of everyone in the world. He held everyone's life in his hands. Huaiyang walked forward and removed the cloth from the mouth of a eunuch who was tied to a stone pillar. The ropes that bound him were very heavy. Every rope was very tight and deep, as if it had sunk into his flesh. When Huaiyang helped him untie the ropes, red marks could be seen on his wrists. A long section of the rope had sunk into his flesh, and he let out a pitiful cry. Huaiyang's movements were very careful as he carefully untied the ropes. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty, save me! Your Majesty, save me!" The young eunuch who had been freed was crawling towards Feng Zhiqing in a sorry state. Wherever he went, a large pool of blood would spread out from his body. His face was filled with tears. "Your Majesty, you recognize this servant. When this servant was working in auspicious Harmony Palace, you even praised this servant for being smart. Feng Zhiqing looked down at him. The delicate little eunuch's body had been tortured to the point that only his face was still intact. Speaking of which, he only felt that the person in front of him was somewhat familiar. Guards. His voice was low and deep, unlike his usual gentleness. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the guards in black grabbing Tang Kai, who was planning to escape, and bringing him back. Tang Kai knelt on the ground, his forehead was covered in cold sweat, his back was also drenched in sweat. He knelt on the ground and continuously kowtowed, "Emperor, spare me, this servant knows he was wrong." Slave. The emperor pursed his lips and laughed coldly. So eunuch Tang still knows that you're a servant. Your Majesty, your servant. Feng Zhiqing's gaze swept across the palace maids and eunuchs who had been mutilated. The eerie glint in his eyes grew colder and colder. There was a faint sign of ice forming. "Imperial consort, please spare my life." "Your Highness, this servant really knows his mistake. Please plead with His Majesty, for the sake of this servant serving the Empress with all my heart." The Empress? The Emperor shot a cold glare at him. Realizing what he had said, Tang Kai wanted to shut his mouth, but it was already too late. Emperor. Chapter 138. No matter how capable Tang Kai is, he can't do whatever he wants in the harem. These matters have been brought to the Empress, but... How dare you? Shen Yueji reprimanded him. Huai Yang shut his mouth in fear. Shen Yueji stared at him coldly and said angrily, "Huai Yang, what kind of person do you think the Empress is? Everyone in the palace knows that the Empress treats people with kindness. If Tang Kai really did such a thing, would the Empress cover it up for him?" Tang Kai's lips trembled as he knelt on the ground. Now that things had come to this point, seeing the tragic state of the secret chamber was still a good thing. If it was him, perhaps the current him would have already become a cold corpse. "Bring him back to Xianghe Palace." The Emperor said these words coldly. He strode out with a wave of his dragon robe. Shen Yueji looked at the Emperor who was leaving and then looked at the mess in the secret room. She waved her hand and said, "Double happiness, order people to settle them down first. We'll see what the Emperor thinks." "Yes, Your Highness." She followed the Emperor out of the secret room. This was the first time Shen Yueji saw Feng Zhiqing so angry. She knew that he treated the people like his children, including the eunuchs and maids in the palace. If they didn't make a big mistake, he would never punish them. He could still talk with her casually just now because he didn't see the terrible scene in the secret room. Now, not only Feng Zhiqing, but even Shen Yueji's heart was heavy. She had always thought that Gu Yueyin was only like this to her. At least to others, even though they were neither relatives nor friends, she should have a conscience in her heart. Plus, she was the Empress now. How could she allow such a thing to happen? In the end, she thought she was too kind. "Emperor, perhaps you've misunderstood the Empress. The Empress is a daughter of a noble family and is now the Empress of Feng Country. Her every move is seen by others. How could she allow her servants in the palace to do such an evil and despicable thing?" She wrapped her arms around the man's arm gently. Only then did she realize that his handsome face was terrifyingly gloomy. She couldn't see through Feng Zhiqing's thoughts and didn't know what he wanted to do now. "That palace maid's eyes are filled with nails." These few words were spoken with a slight tremble in her voice. Shen Yueji listened quietly. This concubine has seen it. It is indeed quite pitiful. The man's dark eyes looked at her, and there seemed to be endless pain and torture in them. After a long time, he finally shifted his gaze away. Jun Zhao's face was a little paler, and he smiled. "We saw her helplessness, her pain. Even minor injuries on a daily basis are painful, not to mention this nail piercing into the eye and torturing the flesh so cruelly. In my opinion, even if eunuch Tang were to be chopped by 1,000 knives, it would still be difficult to make up for his crimes. The hand under the dragon robe suddenly tightened, and the man's handsome face paled even more. He pursed his lips slightly. Imperial consort has helped me settle down those people inside. Yes, Your Majesty. Qiu Yang. Emperor. Feng Zhiqing swept a glance at the trembling Tang Kai behind him. His handsome face, which had lost its composure for a moment, returned to normal. 3 words flowed from his lips faintly: Auspicious Harmony Palace. Yes. When he saw Huai Yang coming out from inside, he was about to chase after him. Shen Yueji gave him a look, and Shuang Shi immediately pulled him back. Chapter 139. Imperial Concubine, why do you stop me? As long as I go to Xianghe Palace and expose Tang Kai's crimes in front of His Majesty, the Empress will protect me, and then. Shen Yueji glanced at him. Don't you remember the 50 slaps just now? Do you really think of yourself as a thing? His Majesty and the Empress love each other deeply. Even if this matter is really related to her, do you think you can keep your life if you go after her and keep blaming her? Even if I can't deal with the Empress, Tang Kai has done so many unforgivable things. His Majesty is a wise monarch and will never ignore it like the Empress. Because His Majesty is a wise monarch, Tang Kai will die if you go after him. If you don't, Tang Kai will die. Why do you bother to go after him? After she finished speaking, Shen Yueji no longer paid attention to him. Instead, she turned to Shuang Shi beside her and said, It just so happens that I have just entered the palace, and there aren't many servants in Phoenix Palace. You can place them all in my Phoenix Palace and find an imperial physician to treat them. Yes, Your Highness. Thank you for your great kindness, Your Highness. In the future, we will definitely serve Your Highness faithfully. Huai Yang was happy and grateful. He immediately knelt down. Shuang Shi looked at him and hesitated. Your Highness, the Emperor took Tang Kai to Xianghe Palace. Is he going to question him in front of the Empress? Those maids and eunuchs who refused to expose Tang Kai's crimes in front of the Emperor must have been threatened. Tang Kai doesn't have such courage. No matter what, this matter is related to the Empress, even if Tang Kai doesn't want to admit it. Turning the jade bracelet on her wrist, a serious expression appeared on Shen Yueji's face. However, Ben Gong knows the Emperor's weakness. The Empress only needs to cry and deny that this matter has nothing to do with her. The Emperor will definitely soften. That's right. She smiled. This matter was done by Tang Kai alone and has nothing to do with her. Even if the Emperor asks for the reason, what can he do? At that time, the Empress can push the dead Yueshio and Mamili to the blame. She is still innocent. Speaking of this, her tone was more self-deprecating. Innocent. She was the most innocent person every time. Xianghe Palace Feng Zhiqing and Shen Yueji went to Tang Kai's residence together. Gu Yuan's heart slowly became uneasy. In this 1 hour, she had ordered people to go back and check on the outside no less than 4 times. Your Highness. Your Highness, the Emperor is back. Hearing this, Gu Yuan suddenly raised her head. Really? She hurriedly tidied up her clothes and got down from the phoenix bed. Her thin and weak body looked sickly and pitiful. When she saw the bright yellow robe slowly appear in front of her, she had a peaceful and gentle smile on her face. Emperor. Supported by a maidservant, she walked towards the young and handsome emperor with some difficulty. Feng Zhiqing stopped in front of her, but he did not hold her hand as he usually did to warm her up gently. Instead, he walked past her and sat down on a round chair at the side. The entire process was cold and distant. This made Gu Yuan feel even more uneasy. Until Tang was thrown into the room by Qiu Yang. "Empress, save me. Empress, save this servant, quickly save this servant." Gu Yuan was alarmed when she saw Tang Kai in such a sorry state. "Emperor." She walked to Feng Zhiqing in a panic. Did Tang Kai really do such a thing? She was so angry that her delicate body trembled. Seeing that Feng Zhiqing did not respond to her, she knew that Tang Kai had been exposed. Chapter 140. If Tang Kai really did such an intolerable thing, even if your majesty wants to spare him, this concubine will definitely not let him off. Hearing this, Tang Kai's hopeful face instantly turned ashen. He dropped his head and sat on the ground. Feng Zhiqing's lips curled into a gentle smile. "All right, since the empress is so reasonable. Qiu Yang. This subordinate is here. Take him away, peel off his skin and chop off his bones. Chop his limbs and throw them into the pond to feed the fish." "Yes. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, please spare me. Your Majesty, please spare me." This time, Tang Kai truly felt fear. Peeling off his skin, that was peeling off his entire body while he was still breathing. Chopping off his limbs, any torture that was used on him would make him wish he was dead. He would rather Feng Zhiqing give the order to kill him. Instead of letting him feel the overwhelming, indescribable pain and torment while he was still alive and still had a breath left in him. Gao Dezhong stepped forward and kicked him hard. "Now you know fear. Your Majesty wants you to have a good taste of having your skin peeled off while you're still alive. The taste of having your flesh chopped off while you're still alive. Look after him, don't let him die." The two secret guards respectfully accepted the order. "Yes." Gu Yuan's small face turned pale. Her rotting skin was peeled off and her face was pale. She stood in front of the emperor, her small hands holding the emperor's big hands. She stood quietly by the emperor's side with tears in her eyes. "Your Majesty, you believe in this concubine, right?" Feng Zhiqing's gentle eyes were full of smiles as he caressed Gu Yuan's trembling hands. "You don't need to explain, I believe you. It's this concubine's negligence, it's all this concubine's fault. If it wasn't for this concubine's negligence, such a thing wouldn't have happened in Xianghe Palace and Tang Kai wouldn't have killed so many innocent people. They are all this concubine's servants in Xianghe Palace. This concubine manages the 6 palaces. Whether it's Xianghe Palace or my sisters, this concubine has always lived in harmony with them. I never dared to cause trouble and distract your Majesty. Your Majesty, this time it was really this concubine's fault. This concubine has caused such a scandal in Xianghe Palace. This concubine's dereliction of duty, please punish me, your Majesty." Gu Yuan knelt on the ground with tears in her almond-shaped eyes. Feng Zhiqing looked at her tear-stained face and abruptly helped her up from the ground. "Your Majesty," Gu Yuan fell into his arms. Wrapping his arms around her slender waist, the man lowered his head and chuckled. "This matter has nothing to do with the Empress. How can Jin bear to punish the Empress? The Empress is still injured, rest well." "Emperor." Hearing his words, she knew that he was going to leave. She hugged his strong waist tightly. "Your Majesty, don't leave tonight, okay? This concubine is afraid. In one night, this concubine has lost the 2 most important people. Now that such a thing has happened in Xianghe Palace, I don't know what to do. Can you stay and accompany this concubine?" The emperor didn't speak. There were too many complicated things flashing in his dark eyes. However, no matter how fast those complicated things flashed, in the depths of his dark eyes, his handsome face, and the corner of his mouth, there was always a faint smile. He patted the woman's thin back, Jin asked Imperial concubine Shin to help Jin deal with the aftermath. Now, Jin wants to see for myself. Chapter 141. Gu Yueyin slowly raised her head from the man's arms. Feng Juqing gently combed the messy hair on her temples. Iner is the kindest woman in the world. They will understand Iner's feelings. This was a man who was more beautiful than a painting. He was brilliant, handsome, gentle, and clear like the wind. These thousands of words seemed to be a kind of blasphemy when used on him. Gu Yueyin raised her head and looked at him. Such a man was the one she was willing to exchange her life for, the man she loved. Even if she knew that he didn't love her. As long as she could be with him, for her, what difference did it make whether she loved him or not? Because the person he loved was dead, a cold corpse. He couldn't have her, only she was alive and standing in front of him. She always believed that one day, 1 year, or even 10 years, there would be a day when he would accept her. Your Majesty, you will let Iner stay by your side forever, right? The man smiled gently, looked at her pair of bright eyes full of expectation, and gently opened his lips. When Iner's injury is healed, we will have a child, okay? Gu Yuein's voice trembled when she heard this, and a deep joy spread from the bottom of her heart. She nodded heavily and leaned her head on the man's chest. Listening to the hot beating heart, her face was full of satisfaction. Even the words she said were full of happiness. I will give birth to children for your Majesty. No matter how many children your Majesty wants, I will try my best to give birth to children for your Majesty. At this time, in the palace, all the places flashed back and forth. The cold wind during the day seemed to be colder than the previous nights. Shin Yueji was held in the man's arms, her head pressed against his chest, and her small body was wrapped in his wide brocade robe. It was warm, even warmer than her Feng Qi palace. She half opened her eyes and yawned in his arms. After dealing with the palace maids and eunuchs, Shin Yueji came back. She had nothing to do, so she fell asleep first because she was sleepy. In the middle of sleeping, she felt someone touching her. She woke up in a daze and found that someone was dressing her. She was so scared that she almost screamed, especially when she saw Mo Wushang's infuriating face. Then, after he put on the clothes, he carried her and began to fly around the palace. Looking at the palace guards below, without waiting for them to notice, she and Mo Wushang had already disappeared. Their speed was even faster than the downpour. In this world, there were no words that could describe their speed. She felt the man carrying her as they flew around the palace at lightning speed. The corner of her mouth twitched. The regent dragged me out of bed in the middle of the night just to fly around the palace with you. I heard from Ji Chu that there will be fireflies in the imperial garden today. Shin Yueji, his face darkened completely. Fireflies. She resisted the urge to explode and glared at the man's peerless face. The man lowered his eyes in confusion. His gaze met hers and confirmed, N. Shin Yueji felt that the smile on the corner of her mouth was about to freeze. She looked at him stiffly. She couldn't smile at all, which made her hair stand on end. Regent, can you tell me whose fireflies appeared during the day? Seeing the man's beautiful brows, she frowned. Thinking. Chapter 142. What's more, fireflies appear in the overgrown places like the back mountain at night. The imperial garden is a place where palace maids and eunuchs are everywhere. They are watered every day. How can there be fireflies? Even if the regent doesn't want me to sleep late, you can't come up with such a ridiculous reason, can you? I didn't lie to you. Shin Yueji snorted and rolled her eyes at him, ignoring him. Motherfucker. It was fine that he tormented her at night. Today, she finally sent Feng Juqing away, but he still didn't stop. He just came back and immediately came to pester her. It was fine that he pestered her. It was fine even if he stayed in Feng Chi Palace. But he didn't say a word. He just pulled her up and put on clothes for her to fly around the palace. Shin Yueji was scared. She was really afraid of being seen by the secret guards in the palace. How should she explain it to Feng Jiuqing? I didn't lie to you. Looking straight at the woman's indifferent face, Mo Wushang frowned. He held her chin and looked into her bright eyes. Shin Yueji slapped his hand away. I don't care if you lied to me or not. I'm going to sleep now. Who asked you to carry me and fly around on such a cold day? She struggled from the man's arms, but the man held her tightly. Shin Yueji glared angrily at the man's incomparably handsome face. Mo Wushang was stared at by her for a while. His dark eyes looked away and didn't meet her eyes. His handsome face looked angry, which gave Shin Yueji the illusion that he was doing it for her own good, but he was giving her the cold shoulder. Shin Yueji was speechless. She lowered her head in resignation. After being angry with him, she didn't feel sleepy anymore. She snuggled deeper into his embrace to avoid being discovered. Is the regent very free usually? I can understand if you come to my Phoenix Perch Palace every few days, but you come once during the day and once at night. You're even more diligent than His Majesty. After dealing with His Majesty, I still have to deal with you. It's very tiring. Then don't see him. Shin Yueji was speechless. The man hugged her tightly and said in a low voice, only with me. Just as he was about to raise his fist and punch him, he saw the dragon carriage flashing past him through his broad shoulders. That pretty silhouette felt familiar. Shin Yueji immediately patted the man's shoulder and motioned for him to put her down. Mo Wushang carried her and landed on the highest roof of the palace. Following her line of sight, he saw Feng Jiuqing's dragon horse heading in the direction of the imperial study. In an instant, his dark eyes became sharp. Shin Yueji narrowed her eyes. He settled the matter at Auspicious Harmony Palace so quickly. It was strange that he didn't deal with such an important matter as Gu Yueyin and the palace, and instead went to the imperial study. Shin Yueji realized that he seemed to be particularly fond of the imperial study. Something flashed in her dark eyes. She turned her head and looked at the man beside her. How is the regent's qigong compared to the emperor's? Stronger than him. Two cold and indifferent words. His voice was cold and his expression was like the wind. His whole body was full of cold air. Even the words he said were short and mean, so cold that he wanted to freeze her to death. Shin Yueji was speechless. Ahem. She covered her mouth and coughed awkwardly. Chapter 143. Shin Yueji's face turned pale and red. Regent, I'm not cold, but it was embarrassing. She was embarrassed. The man's noble face was proud and powerful. He put his arms around her waist and rose again. Shin Yueji grasped the man's clothes tightly. When her feet touched the bricks, she slowly opened her eyes. They were on the roof of the imperial study. At the same time, she was also surprised. Regent, I haven't said anything yet. How do you know I'm coming here? Mo Wushang's lips curled into an indiscernible arc. Once he thought of who he brought her to see, his handsome face turned frighteningly gloomy. He turned his back to her, revealing his broad and muscular back. Dressed in a black robe, he exuded an indescribable air of nobility. Shin Yueji didn't look at the reaction on his face. Instead, she lifted her skirt and squatted on it. Her little hands lifted the yellow bricks one by one carefully. To be honest, the emperor stays in this imperial study every day, either late at night or in the day. In addition to a pile of memorials, I'm really curious about what's in it. It's more important than what happened today in the Emperor's heart. But the Emperor's martial arts are too high, and his mind is more meticulous than a woman's. If he finds out, I'll be finished. Fortunately, the regent is with me. Even if the Emperor finds out, I believe the regent will escape with me first. No escape. The man's aura was cold and his voice was cold. Shin Yueji's hand paused and then slowly moved the fourth brick out. She said seriously, we have to escape. If the Emperor finds out that I have an affair with the regent, my life will be over. Speaking of this, she saw his tall body standing there motionless with his back to her. Shin Yueji pulled the bricks with difficulty. Especially when she saw the red and swollen scars on her two claws, she was angry. She lifted a brick and threw it at him. The man didn't move. The brick hit him and made a muffled sound. It fell at a fast speed. Shin Yueji was afraid of making a noise and alarming the people inside. She pointed to the falling yellow bricks and said, "Hurry up and pick it up for me." Whoosh! A sound was heard. The tall and straight figure flashed in front of her eyes, and in the next moment, another brick appeared on top of the pile of bricks she had piled up. Looking up, she saw the man's cold and awkward face. Shin Yueji instantly smiled and patted the man's handsome face with her dirty claws. Good boy. Mo Wushang enjoyed it. The coldness and awkwardness on his face disappeared, and he lowered his status to help her remove the tiles piece by piece. Ji Chu, who was hiding in the dark, was speechless. Why did he feel that his family's brave and decisive Prince Regent had learned to be a dog in front of noble consort Shin? Ji Chu rubbed his forehead. This was not a good sign. Inside the imperial study the man was dressed in white, and his slender and straight back made him look like a young woman. Her black hair was like silk, and it hung down like a waterfall behind her head. He stood at the side of the dragon throne, his slender and fair fingers gently stroking the smooth surface of the table. His movements were very gentle and meticulous. Shin Yueji looked down. The dragon table was very clean. Occasionally, the places where his hand touched would have some memorials. Chapter 144. She didn't understand what Feng Zhiqing meant. These days, other than some matters that happened in the palace, he spent every day in the imperial study. Occasionally, the ministers of the court would come to him to discuss important matters. After they left, he was used to staying in the imperial study alone. It wasn't until late at night when he realized that it was time to go back that he would go to Auspicious Harmony Palace or her Phoenix Perch Palace. Caught off guard, the man's tall body pressed down and held her in his arms in a very ambiguous position. Shin Yueji didn't dare to move or make a sound. She could only use a pair of fierce eyes and stare at him fiercely. Mo Wushang didn't seem to feel anything as he held her tightly in his arms. As long as she looked at the man below, he would tighten his grip until Shin Yueji couldn't breathe. She turned her head angrily. There was a touch of something soft and cool on her pink lips. The smooth and soft touch made her heart beat faster in an instant, thumping non-stop. When she saw the man's handsome and fair face, a hint of pink slowly climbed up his handsome face. Especially the clean and soft earlobe that she had pressed her lips on just now. With both hands covering her trembling heart, Shin Yueji pushed him back a little. Mo Wushang was rarely honest and didn't come closer. His pink handsome face looked especially attractive. Even his pitch-black eyes had a layer of pink that was slowly spreading out. Shin Yueji tidied up the messy clothes on her body and cursed him in her heart. Damn it, he was clearly the one who took advantage of her. She hadn't even felt embarrassed yet, but he was the first to feel embarrassed. He made her look like a ruffian who took liberties with a good woman. Rumble, a sound came from the imperial study, causing Shin Yueji to temporarily put away the restlessness in her heart. She saw that a layer of bookshelves behind the dragon throne was opening up at a slow speed. The man's gaze looked at the slowly opening secret room. His big hand on the dragon throne was slightly clenched. The secret room wasn't big and could only fit one person. Looking at the white-clothed woman inside, Shin Yueji's petite figure felt indescribably familiar. At her waist was a jade pendant that Shin Yueji would never forget even if she died. She remembered that it was the token of love that Feng Jiuqing gave her. She had been wearing it carefully. Later, after entering the palace, she did not know how she lost this jade pendant. She had been looking for a chance to tell Feng Jiuqing, but he was too busy every day and she could not see him. It turned out that the person who had been deceived was not only her, but Gu Yuan as well. She had always thought that the person Feng Jiuqing loved in his heart was Gu Yuan. Only now did she understand that she and Gu Yuan were merely pawns he used. The woman he truly loved was in this secret chamber of the imperial study. He spent most of his time here every day. In the eyes of outsiders, he was a sage who worried about the country and the people, but in reality, he was just accompanying the woman he loved. Shin Yueji only felt endless mockery in her heart. They had been married for 9 years, but she didn't understand him at all. Chapter 145. Seeing that the last cover was removed, the woman's face was about to be seen. Suddenly, Your Majesty, Moon Imperial Concubine requests to see you. Gao Dezhong's voice came from outside. Almost instantly, the door of the secret room was quickly closed, and the huge imperial study was restored to its previous emptiness. Feng Jiuqing sat on the dragon chair with a flutter of his brocade robe. His face was clear and ordinary, and there was a touch of softness in his eyes. It was hard to imagine what he was thinking about when he stared at the secret room alone, and what expression he had on his face. When he heard the 2 words, Moon Imperial Concubine, the man's gentle lips opened slightly, as if he was carefully recalling this person's name. Gao Dezhong carefully opened the door and came in, and said a few words in the emperor's ear. Feng Jiuqing's eyebrows relaxed, and he was about to refuse. Moon Imperial Concubine said that she has something important to report to Your Majesty. It's about Imperial Concubine Shin. Imperial Concubine. Feng Jiuqing raised his clear eyebrows, and his beautiful fingers tapped on the table. After a moment, he said, "Let her in." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Knock your sister." On the roof, listening to the words that Gao Dezhong said in the emperor's ear, Shin Yueji couldn't help but curse in her heart. This Zhang Sanwuyue came to see the emperor in her name. What the hell was he doing in broad daylight? Feeling that the man was leaning towards her again, Shin Yueji had nowhere to vent her anger, so she hit him hard and said, "Stay away from me." Mo Wushang's eyes were sad, but Shin Yueji's attention was not on him, so she naturally couldn't see his sad little eyes. When he saw that she was completely focused on Feng Jiuqing, his pair of intimidating eyes gradually turned cold. He stared coldly at that tiny head that kept looking down, and the intense coldness that emanated from his body spread rapidly, as if he was going to drown her in it. Feeling the coldness emitted from his body, Shin Yueji was shocked. The next second, she quickly took his hand, took the initiative to lean on his arms and look down. She did not forget to put one hand on his back, patting him comfortingly. Good, the coldness dissipated, and the man was no longer as cold as frost. Even his cold eyes gradually returned to normal, and he looked obedient. Shin Yueji secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. This guy, it was really everywhere, exuding a strong desire to exist that could not be ignored. "This concubine greets Your Majesty." The woman below was dressed in a long pink dress. Her beautiful face was made up, and her hair was not decorated too much. She looked simple and elegant. Especially that graceful and exquisite figure, and that small voice that was like the chirping of an oriole. It had to be said that Shin Yueji couldn't deny that in this back palace, where there was no shortage of women, Zhang Sun Weiyue's appearance was still superior. Like the other imperial concubines, Zhang Sun Weiyue came prepared. Her left wrist was holding a food box. A pair of watery, almond-shaped eyes stared at the incomparably handsome man in the upper seat. Her pretty face was pink and she wanted to say something. Emperor, this concubine made some osmanthus cakes and personally brought them to you. Without needing Feng Zhiqing to say anything, Gao Dezhong had already turned down her good intentions with a smile on his face. Imperial concubine Moon is too considerate. His Majesty doesn't like to eat sweet things. Imperial concubine, please take this osmanthus cake back. Chapter 146. Seeing that the emperor did not move, Zhang Sun Weiyue plucked up her courage and went forward. She put the food box in her hand on the dragon table and opened it considerately. She took out a plate of exquisite and beautiful pastries. Her slender hand took a piece of pastry and handed it to the emperor. I heard that Sister Imperial Concubine knows that the emperor doesn't like sweets, so she specially added some plain side dishes to the desserts to relieve the grease. The emperor praised her. This concubine is displaying her slight skill in front of an expert, imitating Gui Fei Jijia and using the same method. Your Majesty, please try this osmanthus cake and see if you still find it greasy. Looking at the pair of fair and slender hands in front of him, they were white and slender, beautiful and exquisite, just like her. The virgin fragrance emitted from the girl was intoxicating. The smell on her body was not as strong as those rouge and powder. Instead, it had a delicate fragrance. At least, after smelling it for a long time, it would not make people feel that the smell was strong. Zhang Sun Weiyue looked at him expectantly, hoping that he would open his mouth and eat the osmanthus cake in her hand. But she raised her hand for a long time, and the handsome man did not move. Not long after, her hand was sore, and her voice was filled with grievance. Your Majesty, do you feel that what I made is not to your taste? Feng Zhiqing smiled slightly and brushed her hand away. His voice was soft. Concubine Yu's skills are as exquisite and intelligent as a person. However, I have already eaten just now. So you have already eaten. Then there's no harm. Later, I will make the same osmanthus cake and send it to you. The man was smiling, and his elegant and gentle face made Zhang Sun Weiyue unable to move her eyes away. Until his gentle lips opened slightly, and seemingly inadvertently gentle words overflowed from his lips, I heard from eunuch Gao that concubine Yu came for imperial concubine Shin. Zhang Sun Weiyue came back to her senses. Her beautiful face turned pale, and she nodded, yes, that was all she could say. It was difficult for her to speak, so she stammered. Seeing her dilemma, Feng Zhiqing gently touched the memorial on the dragon table and picked up a book to read. Concubine Yu, if you have something to say, just say it. There's no need to be embarrassed. I hope I am thinking too much. I only want to say it. When the time comes, your Majesty will not blame Sister Imperial Concubine. Zhang Sun Weiyue raised her head cautiously to look at him. Seeing that he was not the same as the emperor, she lowered her watery eyes. Before I entered the palace, I was as close as sisters with Sister Gui Fei. Presumably, the emperor knows that imperial concubine Jijia has feelings for the regent. He saw the emperor's hand paused for a moment, but other than that, he didn't say anything. Carefully observing this, Zhang Sun Weiyue was happy but worried. When we were outside the palace, Sister Imperial Concubine met Prince Regent many times. It was me who gave advice for Sister Imperial Concubine. But I don't know what happened. Just as Prince Regent was about to fall in love with Sister Imperial Concubine, Sister Imperial Concubine suddenly entered the palace and abandoned Prince Regent. During the time I was in the palace, I also went to Feng Chi Palace to greet Sister Noble Consort. Who would have thought that Sister Noble Consort would speak ill of me? She completely disregarded our old friendship and humiliated me in every possible way. She even seriously injured my trusted servant girl. Speaking of this, the corners of Zhang Sunwue's eyes were red, but she still wiped away the tears in her eyes bit by bit. I don't know how Sister Imperial Concubine became like this. I left with a cold heart. When I went back, I thought about it. I always felt that there was something that caused a misunderstanding between me and Sister Imperial Concubine. Until today, when I went to Feng Chi Palace to visit Sister Imperial Concubine again. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.